Good morning, Faith Community. It's my pleasure to continue sharing with you today about the events of Passion Week. And what we're looking at is Christ's sovereignty as he depends upon his Father in these moments leading up to his death. It's easy to look at these sometimes and think that things are out of control. But what we see is that Jesus is entrusting himself to his Father, who is absolutely in control. We saw on Sunday, in Palm Sunday, that Jesus depended on the Father for his authority over people. Yesterday, we talked about Jesus coming down into Jerusalem on Monday, and he curses this fig tree. And we saw that he depended upon his Father for authority over creation. What we're going to see today is that Jesus depends upon his Father for authority over the temple, over temple worship. We're going to look at Mark 11, verses 15 through 19 today. Mark 11, 15 through 19. So it says this, and starting in verse 15, they came to Jerusalem, and he went into the temple and began to throw out those buying and selling. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the chairs of those selling doves, and would not permit anyone to carry goods through the temple. He was teaching them, "Is it not written, 'My house will be called a house of prayer for all nations,' but you have made it a den of thieves." The chief priests and the scribes heard it and started looking for a way to kill him, for they were afraid of him, because the whole crowd was astonished by his teaching. Whenever evening came, they would go out of the city. You know, in Mark 11, this episode is sandwiched between the events surrounding the fig tree. So right before, we see Jesus walking down to the temple and he curses the fig tree. And then we see the next morning in verse 20, they walk by and Peter notices that the fig tree is withered. And what Mark does is he sort of bookends this episode with the temple with the fig tree. And the reason he does that is because the fig tree isn't about the fig tree. It's about the temple. Remember what Jesus did when he saw the fig tree. He looked for fruit on it, and because there was no fruit, he condemned it. He cursed it. It would no longer perform its function because it was fruitless. Jesus was using the fig tree as an object lesson for the temple. The temple also has no fruit. As Jesus comes into the temple and he looks around, what he sees is he sees a bazaar. This was called Annas' bazaar. And Annas, this high priest, he really wasn't a high priest, but he sort of had all of the authority of a high priest. He had this bazaar where he would sell to the people. The people, as they came in order to have a sacrifice that they could make, he would require them to purchase one of his lambs. They would have to exchange their money for coin that was accepted in the temple. And he was inflating prices and he was abusing the people. But not only that, the area where he had his bazaar was the court of the Gentiles. This was an area that had been created in the temple for Gentiles to come in, non-Jews to come in and pray. And Jesus sees here that they've crowded out the Gentiles. The Gentiles are no longer able to come in and pray in his Father's house. And it's for this that he condemns them. He quotes from Isaiah 56, verse 7, where he says, "Is it not written, 'My house will be called a house of prayer for all nations,' but you have made it a den of thieves." Jesus explains the purpose of the temple is prayer, and it's not just prayer for the Jews. It's prayer for the Jews and all nations. But instead, they're fleecing the people. They're stealing from the people. The fruit of the temple was meant to be a spiritual vitality that was marked by prayers from every nation going up to the Heavenly Father. Jesus demonstrates once again that he has authority. The reason he has authority in the temple is because he's depending upon his Father. He is walking in obedience, perfect obedience. Why? Because he is the Son of God, because he is God. The reality is that Jesus is still sovereign over his house, over his temple. And the temple today, that temple was destroyed in 70 AD. Jesus actually prophesied it on Palm Sunday as he came into Jerusalem. But the temple that he has today is made with living stones. It says in 1 Peter 2:5, you yourselves as living stones, a spiritual house, are being built to be a holy priesthood to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. The physical temple on earth has been destroyed because Christ is building his church. And his church is built out of living stones. Each of us is a living stone, and together we build up this temple. And the temple is a spiritual house meant to offer up spiritual sacrifices. Jesus is still coming into his temple today. He's looking around, and he is looking for those whose hearts are fully his, for those who are offering up prayers to the God of every nation. We're going to talk tomorrow about prayer. Jesus uses this episode to teach his disciples how to pray in faith. We're going to talk tomorrow more about that. Thank you so much for listening.